Welcome to our EDP415, the Literacy Researcher Dialogic Circle discussion for Assessment 2. We'll be commencing with introductions before we start our discussion. Louise.
Hi, my name's Louise Smith and my student number is 164888090.
Hi, my name is Jamy Stallman and my student number is 18751037.
And my name is Rebecca Bernstein, student number 124899947. Now over to Louise to commence the discussions.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, my study focus centres around literal comprehension of information texts. So my research question is, can the application of a collection of comprehension strategies coupled with current curriculum content texts with a Year 2 child improve literal reading comprehension of and engagement with information texts? Based on 8 30-minute sessions over a 4-week period, outcomes measured by the completion of oral retellings, literal comprehension questions, and motivation to read profile reading survey. The literature I have reviewed around both comprehension and the use of information text contains a mixture of peer-reviewed primary and secondary resources. Most are journal articles along with chapters from 2 books. Much of the research around comprehension began in the 1980s, and it hasn't had the conjecture that decoding has experienced throughout the years. I'm going to run through some of the main ideas I found from the literature. So the first was the situation model, which is a framework for comprehension, as described by a couple of the authors. This is based on work by Van Dyke and Kinch, that text is produced first at the word level, then at sentence level, and then at text level. All of these processes combine with other cognitive processes and with previous knowledge to build a mental picture of the text. Vygotsky's sociocultural theory is evident throughout the literature, which is where children progress their learning with help from a more knowledgeable person. Scaffolding is provided until eventually the student can work independently. Clark and colleagues describe this principle in detail, and their interventions, along with many of the other interventions I reviewed, are designed with this primarily in mind. The sociocultural theory underpins the gradual release of responsibility. This is highlighted by many, including Rutzel, Smith and Forson, who all outline the importance of the gradual release of responsibility when teaching comprehension strategies. All studies revealed improved comprehension when explicit teaching, modelling and a gradual release of strategies was employed compared to the control groups. Reciprocal teaching was a popular choice among the interventions described as effective pedagogy when teaching comprehension strategies. Seminal work by Lisenchuk and colleagues and others in later studies experienced significant comprehension gains when using the practice. Transactional strategies instruction, otherwise known as TSI, was recommended by a number of the authors, including Duke and Pearson, which is teaching a coordinated set of comprehension strategies. Often comprehension strategies are taught in isolation, whereas with TSI, students are taught the strategies within a short time frame and are simultaneously taught how to coordinate their use together. This approach seems to tie in well with the gradual release of responsibility pedagogy. And finally, the use of non-fiction text can be of more interest to boys than fiction, primarily due to biological differences, according to research from multiple authors, including Sen and Lisenchuk and colleagues. So boys' motivation to read, and therefore their standard for coherence, can be improved with the use of non-fiction texts. Clark and Lott emphasised a slightly less explicit approach to teaching comprehension strategies with information texts, as students in this study were not taught when and why to use the strategies, which differs from the more explicit approaches in other studies. That is it for me. Does anyone have any questions?
That was fantastic.
Thanks, Louise.
And you got pedagogy first time. That's absolutely fantastic, because I won't. Now, the question I have, now your intervention is based on the collection of comprehension strategies. Now, is there an ideal number of strategies or comprehension strategies to teach children? And if so, why?
Good question, Rebecca. In this study, Rutzel and colleagues taught a set of 8 strategies, but this was over a period of a whole semester. A number of the articles recommended teaching multiple strategies and also how to coordinate their use. But there wasn't really a consensus on any ideal number, and many suggested that this needed to be looked into further.
Yeah.
And also around which combinations of strategies would be most beneficial.
Yeah.
But given the time restraints on my intervention, I'll only be teaching 3 strategies.
That is fantastic. And I suppose that is in regards to year levels as well. The number needed or the comprehensive strategies required.
Exactly,
That's brilliant.
yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Louise, Jamy speaking here.
Yep.
You mentioned that the boys prefer non-fiction texts, mainly due to biological differences. Can you elaborate a little on that?
Sure. So girls and boys' brains develop differently. For example, there's a part of the brain called the corpus callosum. This part of the brain helps facilitate communication, and SEND indicates that it is 20% larger in females than males. Also, the brain's frontal lobe and cerebellum are responsible for language skills, and these areas of a 5-year-old boy's brain are similar to a 3.5-year-old girl's brain.
Wow.
So these are just a couple of examples of biological differences that can have an effect on boys and literacy.
It'd be really good to see if that sort of, you said that difference was there in a 5-year-old brain. It'd be really good to see if research further showed that down the track, like, for older children. But yeah, thank you for that, Louise.
For sure.
Okay, all right. Well, I might go next. So Jamy speaking here. My action research is based around inferential reading comprehension using the Think Aloud strategy. My research question is, can the Think Aloud strategy be used to develop inferential reading comprehension over 6 one-hour lessons using riddle poems in stimulating and engaging one Year 6 boy who is a reluctant reader and identifies as below national and school average benchmark standards, measured by audio recordings and a rubric? And a couple of sub-questions I have are, why do boys' engagement levels in reading decrease as they get older? And can using riddles harness existing interests, curiosity to promote an enhanced engagement? I first read up on a vast range of peer-reviewed literature to do with the Think Aloud strategy, reading comprehension, as well as engaging boys in literacy. The Think Aloud strategy in reading comprehension involves the teacher modelling internal thinking throughout reading aloud. I was inspired by Pegram's, Jake Matthews and Mahanti's ideas in that this strategy engages all students, broadens their vocabulary, develops an independent classroom environment and develops critical and analytical skills, which is part of the critical and creative thinking capability in the Australian curriculum and encourages independent reading and fluency. The research also found that this is more effective with a smaller group of students. However, Yar, McTide and Joshi disagree here, claiming that with larger class groups, students have a greater opportunity to construct meaning through peer modelling and class discussions. It will be interesting to see if this intervention works with only one student using this strategy, as per my intervention. This strategy in reading comprehension is founded in Vygotsky's sociocultural constructivist theory, where children think aloud through copying a more knowledgeable other before they use their inner speech to think through problems symbolically. Vygotsky refers to this as a critical stage of cognitive development, where they enter the zone of proximal development. Through scaffolding and modelling using the Think Aloud strategy by the teacher, students will be more likely to succeed and learn. Through my research on engaging boys, I identified 2 areas that I need to focus on. One being described by Sen as the topics of interest need to be motivating through authentic texts and of the student's choice. And the other is reiterated and expanded on by Young and Kerwood, claiming that the text should relate to popular culture using multimodal strategies. The overall main message on engaging boys tend to lay around finding the subject that motivates the individual. That was about all for me. Was there any questions?
Yeah. Now, you mentioned involving authentic, oh, it's Rebecca speaking, by the way. You mentioned involving authentic and multimodal strategies in motivating boys. How
Yes.
will you accommodate for these strategies in your intervention itself?
Great question, Rebecca. I found some YouTube videos that are short riddles where they speak the riddle, but the student will also need to read it aloud, and I'll model the read aloud strategy. The student is also very interested in the Lord of the Rings, so we're deciphering riddles on The Hobbit to make it more engaging.
Fantastic.
He will also tape himself doing the talk aloud strategy and his riddle that he makes. So that'll be a bit more engaging for him there, using both technology and
That'd be great, yeah.
yeah.
And he'll be able to reflect on it. So when he watches it himself, he'll be able to reflect on his performance and engagement with it. That's great.
Yeah. So hopefully doing it on the Lord of the Rings, he'll
Yay.
get a bit more into that. Yeah.
Definitely. Well done.
Cute.
Louise speaking. That all sounds very interesting. I love the whole riddle thing.
Yes.
But I have a question about Think Aloud.
Yeah.
So if teachers verbally model the Think Aloud strategy throughout reading a piece of writing, could these interruptions be disadvantageous to comprehension? And if so, or if not, why do you think that?
That's an interesting point that you make there, Louise. There was a group of second language learners in a study in America who found that some students found that the Think Aloud strategy was disruptive. This could be due to the fact that maybe they had already possessed the metacognitive skills, though, and didn't need to use the Think Aloud to increase reading comprehension. Most articles read, though, found readers who needed help in reading comprehension benefit from and increased comprehension. So my particular child is a struggling reader, so I think this possibly could actually help him. But with other students who are, are quite fluent in reading comprehension, then that may yes, you may be right there.
Yeah.
That could. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Right. Over to you, Rebecca.
Excellent. Now, the initial launch pad, sort of the big idea that started my study, was the disengagement of boys within the literacy classroom. This is a complex issue, which I experienced on my prac placements, and a few other students did as well. The issues range from dismantling of gender conditioning and stereotypes through to allowing boys to choose the topic of their writing. But to allow for a short intervention, I narrowed my focus to the use of technology to promote engagement in narrative writing construction. My research question is, how does the meaningful incorporation of technology support the increased literacy engagement for one Year 4 boy in narrative writing construction, with outcomes measured by the comparison of production and quality between handwritten and technology produced using Google Docs on iPad, narrative writing tasks via work examples, assessment rubric, structured observations via checklist, and educator interviews of the child. I think I need a drink of water after that one. Now, my literature review examined peer-reviewed journal articles, case studies and reports, including both qualitative and quantitative data, and primary and secondary research and analysis. The disengagement of boys, particularly in writing, is a current hot topic in the media. Now, a consistent theme throughout the literature on this issue is that student perceptions, particularly in male students, on being in control of their own learning is a powerful indicator as to their level of academic engagement in the classroom, and student-centred approach promotes engagement in tasks. This was highlighted by a research project conducted by Deed and Campbell in a group of male students at a low socioeconomic Victorian primary classroom. Mixed methods were used to explore boys' general academic disengagement, and I found it very interesting reviewing the empirical data collected, particularly around the personal perspectives from the boys and how a sense of control and connection with the learning and their lives was so important to them. But is there really a difference between girls' and boys' literacy achievements? Yes. There is concerning data regarding the disengagement of boys in literacy in Australia, particularly writing. According to the ABS, 16% of boys achieve under their minimal expected standard in NAPLAN writing, whereas only 6% of girls achieve under the national minimum standard. These figures help narrow my research focus to writing, specifically narrative writing. Now, writing traditionally means pencil to paper. through my literature review, being page-bound and being told what topics to write about seemed to decrease boys' level of motivation and engagement, a disconnect from their real lives. Speaking about real lives, learning does not occur in a vacuum. Vygotsky's sociocultural theory asserts that learning occurs within a social environment. We learn by modelling and interacting with others, and technology can be used, harnessed, to facilitate or enhance this social connection and communication within the classroom. Now, technology, without a doubt, is embedded in our social context and assists us to build new connections, relationships and understandings. One of the reports I reviewed, commissioned by the Australian Government Quality Teacher Program, argued that traditional pedagogical approaches have failed many boys, and curriculum aligning with their natural interests, including a focus on multimodal reading and writing practices, particularly authentic integration of ICT, and writing topics of interest, should be implemented to increase motivation and engagement, thus deepening learning for boys. So, why not? Let's connect learning experiences to boys' real-world interests, AFL, in my action research, and incorporate technology into the construction of narrative writing. I'm looking forward to the key findings.
That'll be very interesting, yeah.
Any questions?
Jamy speaking here. The first research project that you discussed, the one conducted in Victoria with a group of boys and their personal perspectives, what was some of the language used directly from the students, and what ICT approaches did the teachers plan to assist engagement?
Excellent. Now, the language, some of it was quite enlightening, to say the least. Some of the milder comments included, I don't care, I hate writing, I don't know how to do it, and it's not worth it. Now, which, really disheartening comments to be made.
I've heard those,
Totally, These comments were in response to a task set of writing, a pencil to paper writing. The teacher asked them to do a descriptive text on the day in the life of an athlete, which is interesting because that's quite a high interest subject. But in contrast, when the teacher asked the same group of boys to write the same topic in an online journal format, there was a distinct positive difference in both behaviour focus and production. So that's really interesting that it had that great impact. So the language totally changed and there was a positive. So I think that links back to the control and also high interest.
And also multimodal, like you've got to,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Rebecca.
No worries.
I have a question. It's Louise here. Rebecca, do you feel that the narrative or imaginative writing is harder for boys to engage with as opposed to something like procedural writing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I experienced that in my prac as well. There really is, as soon as you sort of say narrative or creative writing, there seems to be a shutdown. And yet again, the language from the previous study that we discussed, the Victorian one, where they were saying don't like it at all. They also use words like girly and flowery, and I actually heard them also on my prac experiences. So it is super complex, but I think we as teachers need to basically help with changing this view of writing. So maybe we can get older boys to sit and read and write with younger groups of boys or younger groups of children. This could provide some powerful sort of literacy role models within the school. And maybe we can specifically highlight and explore texts that were written by male authors with themes that relate to boys. So yet again, dismantling some of the stereotypes and maybe scaffolding genres so we can use procedural writing, which they are comfortable with, and have that sense of agency and control over, maybe as a gateway to narrative writing. So that would be really interesting research questions. Obviously, they're not being included in my current one, but
Definitely, yeah.
Fantastic.
I like the idea of getting the older boys to sit with the younger groups.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be very powerful.
I remember reading that it's probably a good idea to have older male role models that can help in the class, like maybe male family members, something like that.
I think I might have read that in the same text or a similar text.
Sen, wasn't it?
Sen, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I remember that one too.
Yeah.
And it is more so for boys because they seem to need that figure, the role model.
That role model,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's great. So I think we've covered that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Jamy and Louise, great job.
Thank you, Rebecca
Thank
and
you,
Louise.